The day America almost chose a king. Part 1. The letter that was never meant to be found. On a cold February morning in 1933, as the United States stood on the edge of economic collapse, a leather-bound folder was quietly placed on a polished mahogany desk in Washington, D.C. There was no press, no announcement, no record in the newspapers. Inside the folder lay a typed letter, only 3 pages long, that, if acted upon, would have ended American democracy as the world knew it. The letter proposed something unthinkable. Not a coup with tanks, not a revolution in the streets, but a legal, bloodless replacement of the President of the United States with a figurehead dictator, installed by the richest men in America, backed by private armies of war veterans, and justified as a temporary necessity. The man they wanted was not a politician. He was not a banker. He wasn't even interested. His name was Major General Smedley Darlington Butler, and he was the most decorated Marine in U.S. history. And he was about to expose the most dangerous conspiracy America had ever faced. America in free fall. By 1933, the American dream had collapsed into dust. Banks failed by the thousands. Farmers burned crops they could not sell. Men who survived machine guns in France now stood in bread lines, staring at the pavement, ashamed. The Great Depression was not just an economic disaster, it was a crisis of faith. People no longer trusted banks, they no longer trusted corporations, and increasingly, they no longer trusted democracy. Across the Atlantic, something terrifying was happening. In Italy, Benito Mussolini had saved the economy by crushing unions and centralizing power. In Germany, Adolf Hitler had been appointed chancellor just days before Franklin Roosevelt's inauguration. Investors watched closely. To powerful men, dictatorships were beginning to look efficient. The men who were afraid of Roosevelt. Franklin D. Roosevelt had not yet taken office, but Wall Street was already terrified of him. They feared his promises: regulation of banks, higher taxes on the wealthy, protection for labor unions, government intervention in private industry. To many elites, Roosevelt was not a reformer, he was a threat. And among a tight circle of industrialists, bankers, and corporate lawyers, a radical idea began to circulate. What if democracy itself was the problem? These were not fringe extremists. They were men whose names were engraved on skyscrapers, men who funded universities, newspapers, and political campaigns, men who believed, sincerely, that America needed saving from itself. Why they chose Smedley Butler? Smedley Butler was an unlikely choice for anything involving treason. He hated Wall Street. He despised corporations. He had publicly called war a racket run for profit. But that was exactly why they believed he could be controlled. Butler was beloved by veterans, especially the bonus army, tens of thousands of World War I soldiers who had been violently dispersed from Washington the year before. If anyone could command the loyalty of armed veterans, it was him. The plan was simple in theory. Roosevelt would remain president, but only ceremonially. Real power would shift to a new position, Secretary of General Affairs. That man would advise the president. In reality, he would rule, and that man would be Butler. All legal, all constitutional, all irreversible. The first approach. The first man to approach Butler did not look like a conspirator. He was polite, well-dressed, calm. His name was Gerald McGuire, a bond salesman with connections to powerful families. McGuire spoke carefully, testing the waters. He talked about instability, about communism, about the need for strong leadership. Then he asked the question that changed history. "General, do you believe this country needs a man on horseback?" Butler did not answer. He listened. A dangerous game. Over the following months, McGuire returned again and again. Each time the proposal became clearer, more detailed, more alarming. There would be funding, millions of dollars. There would be organization, hundreds of thousands of veterans. There would be support from men whose wealth could bend governments. All they needed was Butler's name. And Butler pretended to consider it. In reality, he was documenting everything, every meeting, every claim, every name. Because Butler had made a decision the moment he understood the truth. He would expose them all. The silence that followed. When Butler finally went public, America barely reacted. There were hearings, there was testimony, there was evidence, but no arrests, no prosecutions, no headlines that lasted more than a day. The story was quietly buried. Too powerful, too embarrassing, too dangerous. And yet the documents remained. The letters, the sworn statements, the congressional record. Proof that once, just once, America came within inches of trading its republic for a king in a tailored suit. This was only the beginning. The deeper Butler went, the more terrifying the truth became. Because the conspiracy was not isolated, it was not amateur, and it did not die in 1934. It simply learned to hide better. The money behind the silence. Smedley Butler understood something most Americans did not. Conspiracies do not begin with secrecy. They begin with confidence. The men who approached him did not whisper in dark alleys or speak in coded language. They spoke openly, almost casually, because they believed they were on the right side of history. And more importantly, they believed no one would ever dare challenge them. Following the money. Gerald McGuire was not acting alone. Butler knew that immediately. A bond salesman could not casually discuss raising millions of dollars, traveling across Europe to study fascist movements, or organizing hundreds of thousands of veterans without backing. So Butler began asking questions, quietly. Who paid for McGuire's trips? Who introduced him to veterans organizations? Who guaranteed the funding? The answers, when they came, pointed upward, toward names that had shaped modern America. Executives connected to J.P. Morgan & Co., board members of DuPont, one of the largest chemical corporations in the world, men tied to National Citibank, Goodyear, and major steel interests. These were not radicals. They were the establishment. A European blueprint. In the summer of 1934, McGuire revealed something that chilled Butler. He had just returned from Europe. Not Paris, not London, Italy and Germany. McGuire spoke with admiration. In Italy, Mussolini had crushed labor unrest and restored order. In Germany, Hitler had neutralized parliament and mobilized veterans into paramilitary forces loyal only to him. These countries, McGuire said, have found solutions. Butler pressed him. Solutions for whom? McGuire smiled. For business. The veterans as a weapon. The most dangerous element of the plot was not the money, it was the manpower. America in the 1930s had nearly 500,000 unemployed World War I veterans, trained, disciplined, angry and desperate. They felt betrayed by the government. They felt forgotten by the nation they had fought for. The Bonus Army, violently expelled from Washington in 1932 by troops under Douglas MacArthur, had left a scar that had not healed. McGuire believed those veterans could be organized, uniformed, armed, disciplined, not to overthrow the government, but to protect it. A march, a show of force, a transfer of power disguised as stability. The man on horseback. The phrase came up again and again, a man on horseback. In Roman history, it was the figure who rode in during chaos to restore order, then never gave up power. McGuire insisted America needed one, and Butler, with his reputation, medals, and loyalty from the ranks, fit the image perfectly. What they did not understand was Butler's true loyalty, not to power, not to money, but to the Constitution. Butler goes to Washington. In November 1934, Butler made his move. He testified before the McCormick-Dickstein Committee, a special House committee investigating un-American activities. His testimony was explosive. He named names, he described meetings, he explained the structure of the plot in precise detail. This was not speculation, it was confession by proxy. A nation that looked away. The committee quietly confirmed Butler's claims. They found the plot was real, they found money had been discussed, they found veterans had been targeted, and then nothing. No indictments, no trials, no consequences. The final report acknowledged the conspiracy existed, but claimed it had not progressed far enough to prosecute. In plain terms, the rich were too powerful to touch. Why America never heard the whole story. Newspapers downplayed it. Editors made phone calls. Owners made decisions. Some papers called it a hoax. Others framed Butler as an exaggerating old soldier. Time magazine mocked the idea. The public moved on. Butler did not. A warning ignored. In speeches across the country, Butler grew more blunt. He called fascism by name. He warned that corporate power was more dangerous than foreign enemies. He told Americans that democracy could be stolen without a single shot fired. Most people applauded. Few listened. Because the economy was slowly improving, Roosevelt was popular, and Americans believed the danger had passed. They were wrong. The plot that evolved. The business plot failed, but it taught its architects valuable lessons. Do not use veterans directly. Do not create obvious power transfers. Do not leave paper trails. Influence elections instead. Control media. Fund think tanks. Shape public opinion quietly. The coup would no longer wear boots. It would wear suits. Butler's final years. Smedley Butler died in 1940. He died frustrated, ignored, uncelebrated. Europe was already burning, fascism was no longer theoretical, and America was about to enter a war that would reshape the world. But the warning Butler gave about money, power, and democracy was never fully absorbed, because history prefers villains that arrive from outside, not those who sit in boardrooms. What came next? The business plot did not end in 1934. It transformed. Its ideas resurfaced during the Red Scare, corporate-backed political movements, media consolidation, the merging of economic power and political influence. Each generation inherited a quieter version of the same ambition: control without accountability, power without elections, stability without freedom. And somewhere in the archives of Congress, Butler's testimony still waits, unchanged, undeniable, and mostly unread. A reminder that America's greatest threats have not always come from enemies abroad, but from confidence at home. Part 3. When the war made them necessary. By the time the first bombs fell on Pearl Harbor, the men who had once dreamed of controlling America from the shadows were no longer whispering about coups. They were indispensable. War has a way of laundering reputations. Factories that once feared regulation became patriotic engines of survival. Bankers who had opposed Roosevelt were suddenly financing victory. Corporations that had flirted with authoritarian ideas were now wrapped in flags. And the United States, desperate, mobilizing, afraid, welcomed them all. The war economy. World War II did what the Great Depression could not. It erased unemployment. It silenced labor unrest. It fused government and industry into a single machine. Steel, oil, chemicals, aviation, everything moved at once. Contracts were issued at unimaginable scale. Oversight was minimal. Speed mattered more than questions. And the same corporations once accused of plotting against democracy now sat at the center of its defense. No one asked whether power accumulated during war would ever be returned. The quiet bargain. The bargain was simple. Industry would deliver victory. Government would look the other way. Antitrust laws softened. Unions were pressured to cooperate. Executive power expanded. The New Deal was not dismantled, but it was redirected. Roosevelt understood the risk, but he also understood reality. You cannot fight fascism abroad while fighting your industrial base at home. So he compromised, and in that compromise, something permanent was born. The birth of the permanent state. When the war ended, Americans expected a return to normal. Instead, they entered something entirely new: a standing military, permanent intelligence agencies, endless defense contracts. The United States had never maintained such a structure before. Now it could not imagine surviving without it. The war did not end power concentration. It normalized it. Enemies without end. The Soviet Union replaced Nazi Germany almost overnight. The public was told the danger was existential, constant, invisible. Fear became policy. Budgets expanded, secrecy increased, dissent was reframed as disloyalty. And behind closed doors, corporations learned the lesson the business plot never fully realized. You do not need to seize the government. You only need to become necessary to it. The intelligence age. The CIA was born quietly. Its mandate was vague, its authority enormous. Money flowed through shell organizations. Operations were classified beyond oversight. Failures disappeared into archives. Democracy still existed, but it no longer had full visibility of itself. The machinery of power had moved into rooms without windows. McCarthy and the useful panic. Fear, once unleashed, rarely remains controlled. Senator Joseph McCarthy was not a mastermind. He was a symptom. Communism became the universal accusation, flexible, undefined, devastating. Careers ended, lives were ruined, questions stopped being asked. And corporations learned something valuable. Patriotism could be weaponized. The new silence. Unlike the 1930s, no one needed to conspire openly. Money spoke through campaign donations, lobbying, think tanks, media ownership. Influence no longer needed uniforms, it needed access. The man who tried to warn again. In 1961, a departing president stood before the nation and did something no one expected. Dwight Eisenhower, general, war hero, insider, issued a warning. He called it the military-industrial complex. He spoke carefully, deliberately. He warned that unchecked power, joined between military and industry, threatened democracy itself. Then he left office, and the machine continued. Vietnam, the proof. Vietnam was not inevitable. It was chosen, step by step. Advisors replaced soldiers, then soldiers replaced advisors, then reality replaced rhetoric. Contracts multiplied, weapons systems expanded, corporations prospered. And when the war failed, no one at the top paid a price. The lesson was unmistakable. Failure was survivable. Exposure was not. The business plot's final evolution. The men of the 1930s wanted control. Their successors learned patience. Why overthrow democracy when you can manage it? Why rule openly when you can influence invisibly? Why risk treason when legality can be bent? The coup that never happened became a system that never ended. A country that still believed. Americans still voted, still protested, still believed their voices mattered. And they did, sometimes. But the largest decisions increasingly happened elsewhere. In boardrooms, in classified briefings, in algorithms no one voted for. Power did not announce itself. It optimized. The unfinished story. History books ended the tale with Butler and Eisenhower, but the story did not stop. It simply learned to speak a different language. National security, market stability, shareholder value, global leadership. Words that sounded neutral, necessary, inevitable. What comes after? By the end of the 20th century, America stood unmatched, militarily dominant, economically powerful, culturally influential, and quietly constrained by systems no single election could undo. The question Butler once asked, who truly governs, had never been answered, only deferred. The 21st century would force the answer into the open, not through soldiers, not through coups, but through crises. Part 4. The Day Fear Became Policy. On the morning of September 11, 2001, the United States did not just lose lives, it lost restraint. For a brief, stunned moment, history seemed to pause. Smoke rose where symbols once stood. Ash covered streets, sirens drowned thought. And in that silence between disbelief and rage, something old returned, something Smedley Butler would have recognized instantly. Fear became permission. A nation watching itself break. The attacks were real. The grief was real. The anger was real. What followed was something else. Within hours, the language changed. This was not a crime. This was not an investigation. This was war. An undefined war against an undefined enemy with no clear end, the most dangerous kind. The emergency that never ended. Congress moved fast, too fast. The USA Patriot Act, hundreds of pages long, was passed before most lawmakers had read it. It expanded surveillance powers, lowered standards for warrants, blurred the line between foreign intelligence and domestic monitoring. It was framed as temporary. Emergency measures always are. They rarely expire. The architecture of watching. What began as targeted intelligence quietly became total collection. Phone metadata, emails, internet traffic, financial transactions. Not because everyone was suspected, but because storage was cheap and fear was expensive. Technology made mass surveillance possible, terrorism made it acceptable, and corporations made it profitable. Private power, public secrecy. Intelligence agencies no longer built everything themselves. They outsourced. Data centers, software, analytics, cyber tools. Private contractors became essential to national security. Their budgets were classified, their contracts renewable, their accountability minimal. A new class of power emerged, not elected, not military, not fully civilian, indispensable and invisible. The wars without victories. Afghanistan, then Iraq, one justified by fear, the other by certainty that did not exist. Weapons of mass destruction were promised, they were never found. But contracts were fulfilled, bases were built, supply chains expanded. The wars dragged on, not because victory was impossible, but because ending them solved nothing for those who managed them. Failure as a business model. Trillions were spent, thousands died, millions were displaced. No one was held accountable. Executives retired wealthy, politicians moved on, think tanks published new strategies. The system absorbed failure like fuel, just as it had learned to do decades earlier. The whispers break the surface. In 2013, the silence cracked. Edward Snowden did not reveal something new, he revealed something vast. The scale was the shock. Not targeted surveillance, not exceptional monitoring, but everything, collected by default. The government said it was legal, the courts said it was complex, the public said it was unsettling, and then life continued. Because surveillance, once normalized, is difficult to feel. You cannot see it, you cannot hear it, you only notice it when it disappears. Democracy in the age of data. Elections still happened, but campaigns were now shaped by analytics. Voters were segmented, profiled, predicted. Emotion became strategy. Social media did not invent manipulation, it automated it. Information traveled faster than verification. Outrage outperformed truth. Fear spread cheaper than facts. And foreign and domestic actors alike learned how easy it was to steer attention without touching ballots. The new corporate titans. Unlike the industrial giants of the 1930s, these companies did not make steel or oil. They made platforms. They knew what people searched, what they feared, what they loved, what they shared. They did not need to overthrow democracy. They shaped the environment in which democracy occurred, and they insisted, sincerely, that they were neutral. The reminder no one wanted. History had come full circle. In the 1930s, power sought control through authority. In the Cold War, through necessity. After 9/11, through security. Now, through convenience. Each stage quieter than the last, each more legal, each harder to resist. The business plot had failed because it was visible. This system succeeded because it was comfortable. The illusion of choice. Americans still believed they were free, and in many ways they were. They could speak, they could vote, they could protest, but the boundaries of debate narrowed. The range of acceptable outcomes stabilized. The system tolerated noise, but resisted change. Not through force, through incentives. The question returns. Who governs? Is it the voter, the lawmaker, the market, the algorithm? Or is it the accumulation of all three, drifting, unmanaged, unaccountable? Smedley Butler had warned of a coup without violence. What emerged instead was something more enduring, a republic that still functioned, but increasingly on autopilot. The storm ahead. By the late 2010s, cracks began to show. Economic inequality widened, trust in institutions collapsed, reality itself became contested. People sensed something was wrong, even if they could not name it. The system had grown too complex, too centralized, too confident, and history has little patience for systems that forget their limits. The next crisis would not arrive with planes or bombs. It would arrive through disbelief, through division, through doubt, through the question no system can survive unanswered. Who is this all for?